Hello, welcome back to Real Opinions. Today's review is of the Sundance Grand Jury Prize winner, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, which aside from having a very annoying title to constantly write down, is actually a pretty good film. Adapted from Jesse Andrews' book of the same name by the man himself, it's the first screenplay he's ever written and he wrote it of his own book. Me and Earl and the Dying Girl is a film that is literally summarised in its title. It's about a kid called Greg who kind of survives in high school by being kind of friends with everyone, but also being a bit of a kind of social misfit and hiding away. His best friend Earl, who he's known since childhood, they kind of make parody films together, like a Sockwork Orange and Senior Citizen Kane and stuff like that, where they just kind of take the piss out of their favourite classical movies. And Greg's world is kind of changed when his mother tells him that his old childhood friend, Rachel, has been diagnosed with leukemia, and so she urges him to kind of like rekindle their friendship, and they become great friends. And the film kind of picks up the whole coming of age style story and kind of runs with it from there. Now, there are a lot of coming of age stories in cinema. There are otherwise known as teen movies. You can look at everything from like the John Hughes movies of the 1980s, even things like The Graduate from the 60s, all the way through to kind of like the John Green movies of today, like Paper Towns and The Fault in Our Stars. All of them have this same kind of coming of age vibe about these kind of teens stuck in a rut between high school and college, trying to decide what to do with their lives, trying to figure out how to grow up as individuals. There are so many of them that it's hard to stand out. And this is where Me and Earl and the Dying Girl kind of does quite well in the fact that it does stand out. It's a little bit more stylish than a lot of them. It's a little bit more kind of quirky, which a lot of people won't like, but some people will. It's not kind of your standard coming of age tale. There's a bit more thrown in there, which is, I think, what makes it stand out above the others and made it win things like the Audience Award and the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance. However, this is not to say that this is an absolutely amazing classical coming of age film that everybody should see, because it just isn't. Last year's Grand Jury Prize winner at Sundance was Whiplash, which is a film I think everyone should see. It's an amazing kind of achievement in directing, editing, acting. That movie was up for so many Oscars and it deserved pretty much all of them, except only one. Me and Earl and the Dying Girl is nowhere near as good as that. It's watchable, it's entertaining, it's very funny at times, but it's not a classic by any stretch of the imagination. Like I say, the story is very kind of on point, it's very familiar. It kind of combines, if you're going to use John Green analogies, it kind of combines Paper Towns and The Fault in Our Stars together. It's kind of the standard coming of age, the lead character Greg trying to decide what he has to do with his life, alongside the whole dealing with teenage illness themes. His friend Rachel has leukemia. It's about dealing with death, about dealing with moving on and moving kind of forward with your life. And I mean, they're very kind of like righteous topics and they're very kind of serious topics. And the film deals with them very well, very emotionally, very thoughtfully. And it's also very, very funny about them as well. It doesn't poke fun at them, but it's not as straightforward as some other films are with them. It kind of takes it from a slightly more self-aware slant. And I enjoyed those elements of the film. I know quite a few people probably won't. Quite a few people will probably find it a bit too self-righteous and a bit too preachy and far too up itself, because it has this very kind of smug narration all the way through from Greg. And you realise a lot of the time what you're watching is this kid complaining about his life when other people are suffering far more than him. And at times it can be quite difficult to be on his side because he isn't the most likeable person. He's very self-involved. I mean, at times it does feel like that's kind of part of the point of his character, but ultimately it means he's not as likeable as he could be. He's harder to get behind. He's a very kind of niche mentality, which I identified with kind of, but I know a lot of people really won't. And then comes the quirkiness, which kind of definitively separates it from whether or not you'll enjoy it or whether or not you won't. I mean, this film was billed in the trailer as from the producers of Juno and 500 Days of Summer, two of my favourite movies, and it kind of does have that similar glint to it. There's kind of little animated sequences, and there's the very kind of self-aware narration where Greg is kind of taking us through the story, so everything's from his perspective. And there are some very, very funny sidebars with that. But ultimately, the film kind of trails off in a very different direction towards the end when it gets a bit more emotional, a bit more deep, and tunes in with the kind of teenage sickness element of the film more. This film is directed by Alfonso Gomez-Rejon, who is the guy who made. You might recognise his name because me and Harrison talked about him at length before when we did our review of The Town That Dreaded Sundown. He directed a couple episodes of Glee, about 6 or 7 American Horror Stories, this, and then a film that just won him the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance.
We don't know.
Because he directed the remake of The Town That Dreaded Sundown. And that film is just a mess of these ridiculous camera angles thrown in for no discernible reason. And at the very, very beginning of this film, I was terrified that it was going the same way, because the first 5 minutes or so has a bunch of these unnecessarily complex and annoying and disorientating camera angles, which some of them in The Town That Dreaded Sundown work because it was a horror film, but in this kind of indie comedy, didn't really. And at the beginning, it was very jarring to watch. I was like, I just want to watch this film. I just want to kind of get in with the characters, know what's happening, kind of get the tone. But it was really frustrating. Luckily, as the film moves on, the director kind of gains some sense of restraint. Every now and again, he does kind of throw a shot onto its side for no discernible reason at all. And it is a little bit jarring. But for the most part, it's actually kind of more reined in. That does kind of add to the quirky tone quite a bit as well. So it kind of very much sets itself up in a different league to a lot of the coming-of-age movies. Which, like I say, is refreshing. But I'm very, very pleased the director found this sense of restraint when he did. Because I think if the whole movie had been like he had made The Town That Dreaded Sundown, it would have completely butchered the script. Because the script is kind of the saving grace of this film. It is very, very well written. It's very witty. It's very charming. Characters sometimes come across as a little annoying or a little too self-righteous, but ultimately this script works because it is funny and it is clever. And it does have some very interesting and kind of well-reasoned insights into not just teenage life, but kind of life in general. And it does them in a very funny way, and in a very amusing way, and in a very off-the-wall way. But overall, I really couldn't help but shake the feeling that I'd seen a lot of this before. I mean, there are some really original jokes in this. There's a really, really great cameo, which I won't spoil, but it literally had me in stitches, easily the funniest moment of the film. And a lot of the chemistry between the actors is very, very good. The actors themselves, mostly new, are incredibly good. But as much as this chemistry is great, and as much as it does feel kind of quite refreshing to watch at times, it does feel like it's just fused together all these different films. Like, it's kind of got the quirky side to Juno, and kind of the more self-awareness of 500 Days of Summer. But it's also kind of got this kind of self-righteousness of something like Garden State or one of Zach Braff's films. And that fused with the kind of this modern age, teenage weepy, like The Fault in Our Stars, where it's just kind of poking you and telling you to cry constantly. It's like, are you crying yet? Are you crying yet? You should be crying. Why are you not crying? And it's really kind of annoying when it twists into that towards the end, because it's not that emotional. I think it's too quirky and off the wall to be that emotional. I'm not quite sure. This isn't to say that I didn't enjoy the film, though. It is very enjoyable. It's very funny. It's very uplifting a lot of the time. It's the sort of film that would have spoken to me a lot more had I been a few years younger. And it is it kind of cracks this coming-of-age drama really well. It approaches it from a slightly refreshing perspective if the plot points are a little kind of stitched together. Overall, I think all of the buzz that's been coming out of it since Sundance with the whole Grand Jury Prize winner, it's going to be the next big thing, I think that is a little bit presumptuous. Ultimately, if you enjoy coming-of-age movies, then you will probably enjoy this film. If you enjoy kind of quirky comedies, you will also probably enjoy this film. If you enjoyed The Fault in Our Stars, you will probably like this film. If you hated all of those, this film is probably going to be your literal hell. And for a lot of people, this film will really hit a nerve and really kind of twist a screwdriver in tight, because it's very obvious with what it wants to be, which is commendable, but also difficult to watch if you're not into that sort of thing. Ultimately, I'm going to give Me and Earl and the Dying Girl a 7 out of 10. It is a solidly funny, a kind of... In fact, I'd go so far as to say it's actually a pretty great teen movie. It is significantly better than both John Green movies. It's a lot funnier than a lot of comedies as well, and that humour comes from a very genuine place. So it's actually quite enjoyable to just spend time with this film. But at the same time, it does feel a little bit stitched together. It does feel a little bit too smug sometimes, and often can be a little bit annoying. But either way, it's a darn sight better than some of the other crap that's out at the moment. So when it does come out, early September, go see Me and Earl and the Dying Girl if you're into coming of age teen movies or quirky comedy at all. Look out for more Real Opinions videos coming in the future. Hopefully we should have up some coverage of Fright Fest next week, when me and Harrison will be sharing the frame together once again. But in the meantime, thank you for watching, as always, and look out for more in the future. Goodbye.